Hi, I'm Bru Baker, and I'm here on My Fiction Nook today to read to you from Tall, Dark, and Deported, which is my latest release. It will be out on April 1st, and it is part of the Dreamspinner Desires collection. It's book number 31, so you know that it's going to have a happy ending and be full of tropey, fluffy goodness, which is something that I absolutely love to read and to write. So I'm super excited to be part of this awesome series. So I'm going to be reading to you today from the first time that Matthias sees Crawford. They are in the airport, and I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Matthias drummed his fingers against the plastic armrest, too keyed up to stay still. They'd be calling for boarding any minute now, though, so he didn't have time to take a walk to burn off some of his energy. He'd feel so much better once he re-upped his visa. Duarte was sure that in 90 days he'd have the orchard's finances in good enough shape to actually pay Matthias a wage, which should be enough to get him a work visa. Matthias didn't even care how much Duarte could pay him. He just needed the steady job so he could have a reason to stay in the States. To pass the time, Matthias let his eyes wander around the packed terminal. It was storming somewhere to the east, and that had caused a slew of delays and cancellations. He watched a harried businessman argue with an increasingly irritated desk clerk, which was way more entertaining than the network news shows blaring on the television above him. The man was absolutely striking. Tall, broad-shouldered, strong-looking, with a jaw that could cut glass, and apparently a tongue that could as well. While Matthias couldn't make out the words, he could tell from the tone they were sharp. Matthias didn't know what was more enjoyable, his attractiveness, or the way his voice dipped, low and dangerous, the angrier he got. His dark hair was sprinkled with silver, just the way Matthias liked it, so aesthetics won out. He grinned to himself and slid down in his chair, giving himself a better angle from which to view the escalating confrontation. Matthias had always been attracted to older men. They were more settled in their lifestyle and less prone to tiresome dramatics. His preferred age had always been around late 30s to early 40s, and that hadn't changed as he approached that age himself. He supposed in time it would be younger men who held his fancy, if his tastes stayed the same. More than just age, though, he was attracted to men who exuded a certain confidence, both in bed and out of it. The man with the salt and pepper hair at the counter definitely had that going for him. He cut a fine form in his tailored suit, but it was the crisp authority in his tone that really did it for Matthias. He needed to shut that line of thinking down before he ensured a very uncomfortable flight for himself. Matthias reluctantly tore his attention away from the scene. He had a few books in the bag at his feet, but nothing that caught his interest at the moment. He'd meant to bring the latest issue of Annals of Botany, but he'd forgotten it in the rush of packing. He let his gaze roam around the terminal once more, covertly eyeing the businessman he'd been watching. When his argument at the check-in counter hadn't gotten the fellow anywhere, he'd taken a seat across from Matthias. He'd had the man pegged as first class, but he hadn't disappeared into the first-class lounge after he'd finished with the clerk. He'd focused his glower on a smartphone in his hand, his jaw set in a hard line as he scrolled through something that kept his interest. The designer suit he wore couldn't hide all that coiled strength, or the way each motion made his biceps bulge. Matthias craned his neck a bit to try to read the mystery man's ticket, which was tucked into an outside pocket of his satchel. From his suit, he looked more like an attaché case type, but the bag was leather and obviously expensive. A hipster businessman, then. Matthias couldn't make out anything other than the boarding zone, which was the same as his. So, coach. That was odd. The guy had first class written all over him. It wasn't a huge surprise when the desk clerk made the announcement that their flight was delayed. The distinct lack of an airplane on the other end of the jetway was one obvious clue, and for another, no crew had shown up to board. The handsome man stood suddenly, moved his things out of the way, and pointed to his seat. His glower had been replaced by an inviting smile, and Matthias had a flash of irrational, white-hot jealousy until he realized the man was motioning to a hugely pregnant woman. She took the seat with a grateful nod, and the man was gone an instant later, gracefully navigating the slew of phone chargers, luggage, and people that littered the floor. Matthias observed him as he made his way over to the window and started pacing, his ridiculous satchel slung over his shoulder. carelessly wrinkling his suit. His wingtips were well shined, and his pants still had a crease in them, so he couldn't have traveled far to this point. Maybe he was a local. Which reminded Mattias of his next priority after his visa mess was sorted out. He needed to get into the local dating scene. He'd been in Seattle to check out a few clubs, so it wasn't like he'd been a monk, but he wanted more than just the opportunity to scratch an itch. Maybe Bree's meddling had hit closer to home than he'd thought. So I'll be doing 2 more readings during this tour. Just check out my blog and I will keep you up to date on when those will be and where you can find them. Thanks for listening.